The Embroidered Sunset by Joan Aiken, VII. "Damn that girl!" exclaimed Willoughby vexedly, cracking the letter about and then throwing it down on the coffee table beside his untasted drink. I tell her exactly what to do. I even pay her fare, and what happens?" "What does happen?" Russ asked. He picked up Lucy's letter. He was a slow reader, and while his eyes made their deliberate way from side to side and down the blue sheet, Willoughby twitched and pressed his lips together and drummed on the arm of his chair with pink stubby fingers. The house was empty. Rose and Coral had gone off to a cocktail party. Willoughby was supposed to follow them when he had freshened up from his day's labors. "Goddamn little fool has found some old lady who's pulled the wool over her eyes properly. Now she's going to spend all the dough I gave her installing this old phony in some deluxe residential home." "Why are you so certain she hasn't got hold of the right old girl?" Russ asked lazily, dropping the letter back on the table and picking up his own drink. "You can see she knows she's being bloody annoying," Willoughby went on angrily. "I ought to have had more sense, I suppose. Ought to have seen she was the last person to do that errand. I know she hates my guts. She can be smart when she wants, and she certainly was sold on those pictures. If it had worked, it would have been, oh, well, to hell with it. There's no use relying on women. They always let you down." "Reckon so," said Russ. If Willoughby had been paying attention, he would have noticed a certain irony in his assistant's voice, but he was irritably rereading Lucy's letter. "And as for sending her to that Appleby place, what do they call it? Wildfell Hall? That's clean out of the question. I'll have to put my foot down." "What's so specially wrong about that place? Do you know something about it?" "What? Oh, no. But you can see a home like that is sure to cost a small fortune. Just newly opened, all their internal outlay to cover," Willoughby said hastily. "There must be dozens of more suitable places. Though anyway, I'm damned if Culpeper is going to shell out to keep some old fraud in luxury eating her head off in any of them." "Well, get the bank to query the annuity payments." "Or you'll get the bank to query the annuity payments?" Russ asked. "Cause a lot of stink, publicity over such a flea bite? After all, even if she is a phony, you say the old lady's in her 90s. She can't last much longer." "If she's not Aunt Fennel Culpeper, then it's money she's no right to," Willoughby said with the obstinacy of the mean man. "I don't care how much it is. It's the principle that counts." "Well, it's your decision, of course, but you can bet your boots on one thing happening. If you start a lot of legal investigations and proceedings—" "What?" snapped Willoughby, taking an irritable gulp of his drink. "Why, since young Lucy seems to have taken such a fancy to the old girl, maybe she finds out what's going on. She'll sell all the pictures she can lay her hands on to raise cash to pay for the old folks' home fees." Willoughby turned a dark slate red. His opaque eyes clouded and bulged. "But that would be fraudulent," he said sharply. "Depends on how she came by them. By God, if she did that, I'd... You really do set store by those pictures, don't you?" said Russ coolly. "I know we reckoned they'd fetch something pretty handsome, properly handled, but are they really going to be worth maybe quite a lot of your time and energy when you ought to be keeping your mind on that dinky Yank takeover?" Willoughby was paying no attention, however. With a set, fanatical expression, he was staring out the window in a vaguely easterly direction. "If I thought she'd do that," he muttered, "I'd damn well make the trip myself. I discovered those pictures, and nobody else, certainly not that puny, ungrateful, two-timing little bag of bones, is going to get the credit. People are going to see that I know something about art." "Go to England?" Russ was astonished. "I'm not going to have that cold-blooded, scheming little hypocrite pull a fast one on me." "Why would you go to this Appleby place and have a grand what would you do? Go to this Appleby place and have a grand confrontation?" Willoughby turned suddenly cautious. "No, I guess there wouldn't be time for that," he said quietly. "But I could go to York, look in on Pugwash Pharmaceuticals while I was there and get the deal clinched, see? And I could tell Lucy to bring the old girl over to see me in York. That'd shake her fast enough. She'd soon climb down then, I bet." You're pretty certain it really is the wrong one claiming the money, then? What makes you so sure? Oh. Wilby waved his pink furry hand. Lots of little things. It all seems to add up. You'd better take me with you, Russ said. If you're so sure, then while you're seeing Pug's wash, I'll run over to Appleby and get things settled there. Don't be a fool, Wilby said shortly. How could you go? If I went, which I haven't decided, I'd need you to stay here and cover the Dinky Yank deal. You'd far better take me. I just told you, Russ, You see, when I was up in your attic that time, I found an interesting thing, Russ went on calmly. Willoughby went cod fillet white under the healthy tan acquired from golfing, spearfishing, skiing, duck shooting, and client watching. Found out? What the hell are you thinking about? He demanded. When I was dumping the pictures back upstairs for you that day Lucy brought them down, the attic was all tidy and ship-shape. Someone had been straightening it up, I guess. I've always wanted to have a look round up there. It seemed a good chance. I found a bundle of envelopes marked Kernahan. So I stuck a couple of them in my pocket. Kernahan was my mother's maiden name, as you may recall. Wilby was silent, staring at Russ open-mouthed, as if a golf club in his hand had suddenly started transmitting messages from outer space. I always thought that tale Mom used to spin about my father having died in a freeway crash hadn't enough detail about it, Russ said meditatively. Then he grinned. And I know now, too, why you got so mad at the idea of my marrying Coral, apart from the fact that it's got to be a Rockefeller. I mean, my marrying her would have a kind of classic touch, wouldn't it? The old Oedipus stuff, just about. Wilby clamped his rigid jaw and massaged his palate with a sticky tongue. Anyway, I'm not sorry about that, Russ went on easily. Marrying Coral would have been an intellectual feast, or wouldn't have been an intellectual feast. If that girl ever had two ideas, she probably tried rubbing them together to light a fire. The way things are suits me much better. Wilby had found his voice again. And do you mean to say, he sounded really injured, that you've been keeping all this under your hat ever since before Lucy went to England? Well, I am surprised at you, Russ, and sorry, too, after all I've done for you. I wouldn't have expected you to be so ungrateful. No doubt you planned to tell me all about it one day in your own good time. Sure, naturally I did. Didn't I fetch you in? Haven't I been training you up for a key position in the firm? Well, the day's come a bit sooner than you'd planned, that's all, Russ said kindly. From now on, I really am going to be your right-hand man, dear old Dad. Russ, look here. For God's sake, have a bit of discretion. Wilby glanced agonizingly at the TV set, as if it might be listening to and recording their words. Well, I'll be discreet, Russ said. What did you send me to business college for, if not to learn how to manage the guy at the top? You play along with me, I'll be as discreet as the Queen's chiropodist, and I'll come to England and handle this Auntie Fennel business for you. After all, she's my great-aunt, too, and Lord knows, little Miss Lucy Hedinairs snubbed me often enough. It'll be a pleasure to make her jump. There was a longish pause, then Wilby nodded reflectively. Maybe there'd be something to it, he said. He seemed to have calmed down a good deal. Russ, not usually analytical of people, was faintly surprised that Wilby had taken the exposure with so little fuss. He seemed almost relieved, as if the revelation were not what he had expected, and indeed much less disastrous than it might have been. Thoughtfully taking his leave, Russ determined to get back into the attic at the earliest possible opportunity. Mrs. Marsham's office was small and tidy, furnished with desk, filing cabinet, and, as a minimal concession to visitors, two scrawny little fireside chairs by which the unfortunate sitter's knees were thrust up on a level with his breastbone. Mrs. Marsham entered the room warily, like the newcomer to the jungle, not certain yet if his role is that of hunter or prey, but a glance at the two pairs of eyes raised to hers gave reassurance. The girl she recognized as the same shabbily unimpressive, mousy, fair-haired, quiet-spoken little thing who had called last week with some pointless inquiry about vaccines. Tiresome, persistent creature. Why had she come back? when told plainly enough that there was no accommodation available at present, and the old lady with her must be the aunt, grandmother, great aunt, or what have you. Nothing out of the common about her either, decided Mrs. Marsham, running an experienced eye over the shabby coat and hat, the various dangling scarves and bulging receptacles. Old ladies of her sort are two a penny in every street. She would be the easy kind to keep in order if she were admitted, but of course there was no question of that. "Yes," she began briskly, shutting the door behind her. "I'm sorry you've wasted your time coming back here. I thought I made it quite plain when you came before that we had no vacancy, that it was quite impossible for us to accommodate anyone else at present." She gave the girl a chill smile, and her glance again brushed the old lady, sitting so meekly with her knobbed feet in their medium black lace-ups pointing straight ahead, and the old-fashioned linen hat jammed down over her wispy bun. "You didn't say you had no vacancy," Lucy replied. "You told me you had beds, but it was short-handed because one of your staff had just left." "No beds, no staff. It comes to the same thing, doesn't it?" Mrs. Marsham's smile became more irritated. She glanced at her watch. "So in the circumstances, I am afraid there's no point in our discussing the matter any more. At some time in the future, perhaps, but I can't hold out any promises, and now, if you'll excuse me, I'm really very busy." "So, as you seem to be having such difficulties," pursued Lucy calmly, "I thought maybe you'd be interested in hiring me, in exchange for taking my aunt, as it were. I'm strong, I'm sensible. I did first aid and domestic economy at school." Mrs. Marsham's jaw dropped. For once she seemed completely nonplussed and gazed at Lucy blankly. At this point, the old lady, apparently perplexed by the silence, ventured to speak for the first time. "What is it, dearie?" she asked timidly. "Don't they have a vacancy? I couldn't quite catch. Can't they take me?" She turned up the volume of her hearing aid until it rattled and whistled, glancing myopically meanwhile from Lucy to the matron and back. "We aren't sure yet," Lucy answered slowly and clearly, giving her great aunt a reassuring smile. "Maybe we'll be able to get something fixed up, don't you worry." "Really, Miss Culpepper, I don't think—" "No, but do think," Lucy urged her. "Think now, think it over. I bet you've hired a lot worse help than me out in these backwoods. I cook okay. I've even worked as a stewardess. There's nothing you can tell me about talking basins to old ladies. There's nothing you can tell me about taking basins to old ladies." "Oh, this is ridiculous," Mrs. Marsham began. She was interrupted by a heavy knock at the door, which flew open. Everybody jumped, Mrs. Marsham not least. The cook, Nora, surged in, wiping her hands on her damp, greasy apron. "Miss Marsham, I can't stop," she announced without preamble. "Nellie's been in to say our Aunty's terribly poor, with the measles, raging fever she's got and can't hardly see out of her eyes. So I'm off home right away. I just come to tell you, can't say when I'll be back." "Off home? But you can't go off just like that." Mrs. Marsham was outraged. "What about the lunch?" "Very sorry," Nora said doggedly. "But my own flesh and blood got to come first, hasn't it? Reckon you'll have to finish the lunch yourself. The taties is on. I done 'em when Nellie came. She feels queer too, she said. Shouldn't wonder if she took the measles too. She's all red up and gummy-eyed. Meat's in the fridge. Here's the shopping list, what's wanted. I'll be getting along now then. I'll send a message when I can come back." She left, pulling the door behind her. "Oh, good heavens!" exclaimed Mrs. Marsham furiously. "And that miserable child's been up here every day after school, hanging about in the kitchen and breathing germs everywhere. I wonder how many of the residents haven't had measles." She was speaking mainly to herself, staring out of the window at Nora's broad departing back, receding down the drive on an aged bicycle. "You're in quite a spot, aren't you?" Lucy said calmly. "I heard them talking at the post office about measles in your cook's family. That was what gave me the idea of proposing myself for the job. Measles lasts a good 2 weeks, and I had it when I was 14, so you don't have to worry about me. What about you, Aunt Fen? Have you had measles?" "Measles," she repeated, slightly louder. Aunt Fennel seemed to be affected by one of her extra deaf spells today. Oh, yes, dear, measles. Yes, long ago, when I was quite a child." Miss Culpepper looked bewildered. "That's okay then," said Lucy. "We'll go back to Kirby, pack up Aunt Fennel's things, give Mrs. Tilney a week's money in lieu, and come back tomorrow afternoon. Will you be able to manage till then? I'd make it today, but unfortunately Aunt Fennel has a dental appointment tomorrow at 2, and she oughtn't to skip it. Will that be all right? Well, Mrs. Marsham said slowly. She bit her lip, annoyed and indecisive. If that kid's been wafting germs about every day, Lucy went on, such as your old folks as haven't had measles are due to come out in a rash any minute now. If I were you, I wouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth. Well, you must understand, this is a purely temporary measure. I can't offer anything permanent, either for you or your aunt. Sure. We can go into that later. We mightn't suit each other. It cuts all ways. Anyway, I'm not looking for a permanent job. Just thought if I offered to tide you over till you got somebody else in, it might persuade you to take Aunt Fennel. Now, we'd better be off. You've got a lot on your hands. Lucy grinned crookedly through her forelock at Mrs. Marsham as she helped Aunt Fennel up out of the awkward little chair. When Mrs. Marsham opened the door, angry words could be heard from the hallway beyond. I'll tell Matron on you. Just you dare, you two-faced bitch. I'll tell her about the time you pinched the cheese off the supper trolley. Ill-treating a poor dumb beast. Poor? That animal's better fed than you or I, and as for dumb... Dumb? I wish some of you were dumb, exclaimed Mrs. Marsham irritably, brushing past Lucy and Miss Culpepper. What's the matter now? She kicked the cat, breathlessly burst out of one old woman, hanging on the wall rail while she pointed accusingly at a second. Kicked your poor pusscat, matron? That never did her any harm. I did not, then. Tripped over it. That's quite another matter. Can't be expected to see it pushing round my feet, can I? Everybody knows how bad my eyes are. I've said plenty of times that it's dangerous to have an animal like that around in a house where there's elderly people. But as for going to kick it... And that's a lie. And haven't I heard you with my own ears saying you couldn't abide the scruffy overfed thing, that you wouldn't mind giving it a good clump? Who's telling lies now? I never said any such thing. You did then. Ladies, be quiet, please. What will the visitors think? What's all this about? Mrs. Marsham said sharply. What happened? Where is the cat? He ran into the kitchen, said the accuser importantly. She was a small, beady-eyed woman, almost totally bald, clad in a long maroon-colored knitted dress and bedroom slippers. She gestured vehemently with one hand while continuing to cling to the rail with the other. Mrs. Crabtree was coming down the stairs, and the cat ran past as she got to the bottom, and she gave it a great kick, poor thing. And she went for to hit it with her stick, too, but she nearly toppled herself over and ran off before she could get her balance. There isn't a word in what Emma word of truth in what Emma Chidrock says, from beginning to end. Got a spite against me, she has, because I saw her at the cheese anyway, said Mrs. Crabtree, fatally weakening her case. The cat was going upstairs, and that's not allowed. Mrs. Crabtree was a stocky woman with a high color that denotes temper, thick-lensed pebble glasses, a shock of untidy white hair, and a white stick. She peered defensively in the matron's direction. But I never went for to kick it, she repeated. Miss Crabtree, you're getting overexcited. It looks to me as if you might have a temperature, the matron said. I think you'd better go and lie down on your bed and take out your dentures. Remember what the doctor said. You'll have to go back on the pills again if you get worked up. These words were calmly spoken, but they had a quelling effect on Mrs. Crabtree, who turned without any reply and hobbled off upstairs at top speed. She did kick your cat, you know, matron, Emma Chiddock said importantly, as soon as her opponent was out of earshot. Right in the stomach, too. All right. I don't suppose she hurt him. He can look out for himself, Mrs. Marsham said irritably. Now, for goodness sake, don't worry me with any more tales. You can go and set the tables in the dining room. If you want to make yourself useful, let yourself out. Will you? She said to Lucy and Mrs. Culpepper. I'll expect you back about tea time tomorrow, then. Now I must see to the lunches, and she hurried off in the direction of the kitchen. Gone to see her precious cow, her precious cat is more like, said Emma Chiddock with considerable malice. She worships every whisker on that fat thing. Bet she does make Alice Crabtree take the pills. Alice doesn't like pills, give a bad dream, she says. And we'll pause there.